In this video, I'll look at putting textures in as parts of materials. I've worked over my scene a bit, making a few more new solid materials such as chrome and white paint, and assigning them to my buildings. Now instead of blues and greens of just object colors, we can see I've got window frames in bronze and chrome, columns in a brushed steel, white around the windows on the second building with bronze louvers, balconies with white paint underneath on the third building, and chrome doors with glass around them. I went through by name, opening up each building and assigning by selecting from a list, or just clicking on the objects. I've done some minor renaming while I'm at it to fix a few goofs, and I think everything is ready to go. Now I'll work on the street. I'll select it and right-click and choose Hide Unselected, or Isolate Selection, so I can see it a little clearer. Isolating is a great feature here. Rather than hiding and unhiding, this temporarily hides everything else and just shows us whatever is selected here. We need to do a material for the street, and it's actually a two-part material we're going to make. I'll press M to pull up my material editor, and you can see I've gone through and done a little bit of organizing, hiding all the components of each material, pressing L for layout, and upsizing some of the samples. Here's how I'm going to handle this. Under Materials and Standards, called a multi-sub-object material. Rather than a single material, such as chrome or bronze as we've used, a multi-sub-object material allows us to put multiple materials on one object. Here's how I'm going to make this work then. I'll start out by double-clicking on Arc and Design and making a new material for the road. I'll make two while I'm at it, the road and the concrete next to it. As always, I'll pick these materials and rename them. This one will be concrete, and the one next to it will be roadway. For both, I'll start out with a matte finish. Choosing in here for the roadway, matte finish, bringing up the roughness to 0.4, bringing up the reflectivity to maybe 0.3, and the gloss down to 0.3. Now, you may look and say, gee, that sure looks like a slightly glossy surface. But I'll put in one more trick. I'll check Highlights plus FG only. So there's only a little bit of a sheen to the road, not really a reflection. For the concrete then, after upsizing the sample, I'll double-click on it to make sure I'm editing the right material. And under the templates, I'll choose Pearl Finish. Alternately, you could choose one of the concretes that's here, for example, a rough concrete. This does come with maps already in it, images that are part of that material, and if we pan over we can see those nodes. There's a couple of ways we can clear these out, as I want more of a solid color. I can right-click on the M and clear that. The connection is broken, and now these maps are not used. I can also drag the node off where it's connected, and now this material is just a flat gray here. I'll pick these extra nodes and press delete to get rid of them. Here's my concrete then. It's a good, soft, rough surface. There's a roughness in here, up to 1, which spreads the light across it. It's got a good gloss and a good reflectivity, but Highlights plus FG, Final Gather only, is checked again, and so it won't really reflect much. I'll turn on the Show Background in Preview, and we can see it really doesn't do much here in the reflection, which is good. I'll darken the color just a little bit, and I'm ready for the roadway. Typically for concrete, I tend to add a little bit of yellow in there by backing off the blue slightly. If you'd like, you can warm it ever so slightly on the red and almost get a French gray going. Now for the roadway. Once I've gone as far as I can with a solid color material, and believe me, you can get pretty far, I'll add in maps, textures, images that are part of a material that define how it looks, and we've got lots of different places we can define it, as we can see from the available slots. For this though, I've made a color map or a diffuse map we're going to use to make it look like roadway. What I'll do is I'll click on the slot or the small square next to the color, and it pulls up the material map browser. This list of standard maps, including bitmap, is anything we can plug into that material. A bitmap then refers to any pixel-based image, not necessarily just a BMP file, but JPEGs, TIFFs, TGAs, and so forth. The other maps we see here are procedural. They generate a pattern at render time, giving us noise, for example, or checkers if we need them, rather than having to draw them out. I'll double-click on Bitmap, and it'll browse to the Scene Assets Images folder, and this is a big reason why setting the project is so important. This took me right to that folder, and we can see images that are parts of my materials. And there's street marked C. When I view this by clicking on the View button, we can see that it's a section of roadway. What I've done here is to imagine this as a one-way street. It's got at least 3 lanes of traffic and a bus-only lane. It's got kind of a pebbly finish, some dirt down the center of each lane, reasonably new markings with a few scratches here and there, and even a sign saying Metro only. I'll click Open, and now this material, well, the wrong one, the concrete, has the right look. If you make a goof like that, it's not a big deal. Here's how I'll handle it. I'll take this node from the diffuse color map, and it leaves the concrete, and I'll drag it onto the diffuse color map slot on the roadway, and it's connected. There's a huge advantage to working in a node-based workflow, and this is one of them. Connecting and disconnecting and reconnecting when you make a goof like that is very easy. Now I'll assign this material. First, I'll pick this object, select the concrete, and assign it, as most of it will be concrete here. Then by polygon, selecting the polygon from the selection under the editable poly, I'll pick the road. Then select my roadway material and click the Assign Material to Selection button. I'll make sure I pick the roadway and click on the Show Shaded Material in Viewport button as well. I'll close that material editor, turn off the selection, and I've got stripes. Here's the other thing we need when we're starting to play with textures. Mapping. We need to tell this texture how big it should be and which way it should go. I'll make sure I've got that polygon selected, and under the modifier list, press U and put on a UVW map modifier. UVW for us refers to local texture coordinates on an object. And the reason they chose UVW is because XYZ and ABC and JKL were already taken. XYZ refers to object coordinates, and so to avoid confusion we needed 3 new letters. The mathematicians owned ABC, and the editors JKL, and so we use UVW. What I can see here is it's stretching out that image, and I can press F2 to turn off shading the selected faces if needed. I'd like it to be a square, and so I'll just copy and paste the length over here to the width. And now I've got this repeating texture of arrows, lines, and a bus lane. We can see where it starts as shown by this orange square. That's our mapping icon, or gizmo, and it tells us where this texture begins. Now, when I get down on my road in my perspective, it looks like the road. I'm seeing a little bit of degradation in the view, as I'm limited in what the graphics card here can display decently, but it's pretty good. When I unhide everything or exit the isolation, I can see my scene, and there's concrete and a roadway. Now, there's one more mess we need to clean up as part of making a multi-subobject material. Back here in my material editor, these materials are not the ones assigned to that roadway. What I can do is click on the eyedropper and pick the material from the scene. What it actually says is material number 63, a multi-subobject material, which has these 2 materials as part of it, is assigned to that object. I'll double-click on it and name this material. I'll call it, maybe, Street and Sidewalk. This way I can find it easily. If you find that you've got extra materials in your multi-subobject material, which happens occasionally, there's a utility under Utilities called Clean Multi-Material that lets you clean up that material. In this case, it's not finding any errors, which would list here in the white field. With my materials in place and textured, I'm ready to get going on the lighting. I've added in textures in the same way on a lot of the buildings, using images I drew in Illustrator and Photoshop to define what looks like lit windows. They're a pattern that repeats, but has an overall pleasing effect when we back out. Additionally, what I've done in mapping is to map each of the floors of the buildings, such as building 1 here, slightly differently, so we don't see the same lit window in the same place. And I did this just by moving around that gizmo in the mapping, using a UVW map in the same way I did the road. I've mapped all 3 of the buildings, and also the extra elements we can see in the background in the same way. I've used that same technique on this fractured side of building 3, where it's got the blocks that pop out. Finally, I've mapped the bus stations the same way, selecting those elements, such as the posters in here, and applying a UVW map modifier, in this case by both sides of the polygon to make sure the writing goes the right way. If we find any more materials needing some attention, we can pick them up easily. It's not a big deal to go back and fix materials or mapping, and get things looking just the way you want, even while you're in the middle of lighting.